The other thing I wanted to give you a bit of context is from the outside, B2B, B2C companies look exactly the same. To be honest, if you look at this picture, you think this is the same company. Well, rather top left, we have IBM, then we have Slack, then we have Amazon, then we have Zoom, then we have Meta, then we have Carrefour. Now, not all of these companies are B2B, not all these companies are B2C. But to be honest, for the naked eye, they look like exactly the same thing. And that's part of the problem of why, from the outside, until you start working with these people and with these companies, you realize the big differences of operations and how their teams are structured and how they work and what's their effectively their raison d'etre, their business models and the why they are who they are. When you actually dig down, we realize there are actually massive differences in the way they operate. An IBM, for example, or a Slack, which is B2B, will actually we actually have to kind of work with the clients, and the buying process involves a lot of consulting with multiple departments. Unlike B2C, which is basically like, let's say, Amazon, it's basically buying, the customer will buy directly. So there's no really an interaction with anybody. Somebody can go to the website and buy. The big difference is about relationships. So a B2B relationship is usually quite long. It could take years, and actually is not basically for one purchase. It's effectively for a number of activities, possibly a large project, possibly a large element of the infrastructure they want to build. Usually it's high value, so you may have less customers, but you may have each one of the purchases of this small, large customers, although a small amount, is actually high value. So it will be, in the hundreds of thousands. So it's not actually like, the €5, the €7 or anything like that. These are actually large purchases. And they're not only high, they're also repeated. So effectively, you have a stream of constant purchases. And in my experience, you end up managing so many purchase orders because you see constant purchasing happening all the time because the relationship is so long. It's not a one-off, it's constantly. And the other two big elements is you have a very long sales cycle. So effectively, every one of the ways that you're actually selling it could take 4 or 5 months or more. And actually, you have customized communication. So you might communicate to a number of people who make decisions. So effectively, the customer who's making the decisions will be basically communicating in one way. Other type of customer stakeholders will be communicating a different way. So you may have legal, you may have finance, you may have procurement, you may have so many different areas. With marketing, you may have so many different areas which are actually involved, and their communication will be customized for them to kind of explain what problem they're solving. And then the next difference is the fact that there's a very complex support model as well. B2B has SLAs, which are service level agreements, and you may have a completely different approach. I mean, if you experience calling Amazon, for example, or you may have been on the phone for a long time, or you have to wait, or you have to kind of receive a callback, when you actually talk to a B2B partner, you usually have an SLA. You usually have the ability to actually communicate very quickly. Their service level is part of their service, and their support is actually managed in a completely different way. And it's expected as a B2B to actually provide a high level of support. In some cases, something called follow the sun, which means that if you are supporting a company which is very large, which is in Europe, in the US, or in Asia, it means that you're going to have people from support actually following the sun. As the sun moves and the days changes, you're going to have different teams in the world picking up the support model as well. So these are actually very large customers, but obviously it happens as well. And that is one of the big examples. So the 4 areas we're going to be talking about: personas and stakeholders, why they're so different, or slightly, I would say, kind of unusual compared to B2C. How does discovery look like? Why the metrics are quite different, and what's the problem with metrics on B2B, and why the product is slightly different as well. And why I mean different, I mean in the way you actually have to deliver the product, and actually the process that you may have to follow to actually deliver products as well. So it's actually a slightly different approach you may not be very accustomed with. I'm going to go back and forwards. The idea is that this is our roadmap. We're going to go through these 4 elements, And then the idea is to actually, as I said, we identify the context, we identify the actions, we look at the tools that can actually help us, and then right at the very end, we're going to go back and say, to kind of have a bit of a backup on the key learnings and what are the key differences anyway. So the first one is personas and stakeholders. Now, what happens here? You're going to have a big difference between B2C and B2B. The customer, so the person buying the product, is usually not the user. On normal cases on B2C, the customer and the user are the same person. So effectively, you actually have to sell, and you know the person selling is going to be the one who's going to be using the product at the same time. So the big issue you're going to have here is that the customer on B2B is not the user. The user will be a number of groups in different areas of the business, and then you're going to have a customer that might well be multiple people as well. So effectively, you may have the customer could be finance, could be procurement, could be legal, could be accounts. So all these people could actually also be part of the customer decision kind of tree that actually these companies may have. So usually what we tend to do is to put every one of the names of who is actually, our customer, to understand something very important that is quite useful to create, is identifying a stakeholder map template. Now I'm going to divide the idea of personas and stakeholders. You're going to have a persona, which is very much about the customer. You may also have a persona dedicated to the user as well, specifically if you're looking at identifying particular pain points or problems to solve. But the idea is that you may have a larger number of personas, a larger number of stakeholders, and therefore you need to manage this in a slightly different way. You're not going to have 2 or 3, you're going to have 10, 15, 20. So how do you manage this? My first tip here is to use a stakeholder map template. Actually, there's an example there on Miro, which is a great way to actually use that, because you can actually present and use it, or use AllStyle, which is the post-its. But the idea is to have a template which is to organize all the elements, all the stakeholders. So you may have procurement, legal, accounts, finance, everybody who's actually internal stakeholder. You're also going to identify external stakeholders, so effectively your client. And obviously, we're talking about internal, obviously from your company. And then the interactions between all of them. So effectively, within procurement, you may have 4 or 5 people which are actually involved. Legal, the same thing. You may have counsel and accounts. You might have multiple people actually do the payments, but also manage the accounts for the particular client. So having visibility of all the people who are related, who may well be interested in making it or be part of the decision-making process, is actually critical. So creating a stakeholder map template, as I said there, is which on the presentation you will have. After you do that, the important thing is to create what we say a power interest matrix to understand who is important, who has the power to make decisions, and what's the level of interest they need to have. So it's a matrix that delivers power on the y-axis and on the x-axis is interest. This is an example that we use, but basically you have at the right top, keep satisfied, manage closely, monitor, and keep informed. So people are, the lower actually are usually monitor, and the highest is managed closely. So effectively, from the bottom onto the right at the top of the left, or the right side. And the idea is that you manage these 2 things to understand what kind of activities you may have to do, or you may have to actually kind of manage and communicate as a product person as well. So I think it's super critical to have this. On the persona side, as I said, there may well be 2 types, one for the customer, one for the user, and each one of them will have its characteristics, but they will be very different to the B2C ones.
Can I pause here, Rosendo? I have a question for you. Thank you. So do you use this map template to enlighten who are your important personas as well, or is it working for you only for stakeholders? Like, do you use this map to map out the primary and secondary personas?
The personas, you may have proxy personas as well. The personas are usually independent and they're usually not connected. They may well be connected. You can put them on a map as well. And the idea will be that they may be related. So for example, procurement and legal are likely to be related. So for example, procurement will not pay you or will not grant you a contract if legal hasn't agreed. So there's connections. Finance, we need to validate that your company has the ability to deliver as well. So effectively, legal may want to wait for finance. I think it's on dependencies. We tend to separate them. The personas are actually more product facing. The stakeholder map is more about managing approvals and managing the actual kind of capturing of requirements, and also identifying stoppages as well. So effectively, any elements on the whole negotiation that you may, as a product manager, may be involved as well as part of the long process, the long sale process as well. But they will be separate. But I'm assuming you are comfortable. Most of the people here are comfortable with creating personas. I think the big difference here is the separation between customer and user. So the customer won't be using the product, the great majority of the cases, the user. And I will explain what happens with the personas in discovery. This is probably the most important thing that you will see happen.
Good.
So, and this is effectively how product management may feel, that actually they're going to have discovery with more people than they expect. So what we applied on JLL was always continuous discovery. So the idea of continuous discovery is that not having discovery that starts and ends, is actually having discovery that actually goes in a flywheel. The idea is that the moment discovery finishes and we do all the validation and tests and maybe some builds, we actually go back and continue. So there's a continuous feed of discovery and understanding of what exactly our clients or business development or marketing and sales, all the actual stakeholders are looking for. What is interesting, I'm going to connect it with the personas, is this. When you talk to the users, because they're not the one paying the money, are going to be extremely open about saying all the things that they don't work. So they say, oh, this doesn't work, and I need this feature, this is super important, blah, blah. But the problem is you have to actually kind of validate this with the customer at the same time to say, well, there is this request from the end users, can you validate this? And there's a lot of additional kind of activities that need to be done because you're going to have multiple stakeholders as well. So the idea is we do a continuous discovery. We use the 5 whys effectively. So, we identify what the problem is together with the customer and the end users. And we actually kind of put them together in what we call an insight session. We do insight sessions every 2 weeks. Those are kind of, there will be proxy and there will be beta testers and there will be people who actually rotate, because if you have the same people all the time, it doesn't work. It actually kind of, you're always listening to the same people. You need to actually rotate some of the groups. We actually we each also use to prioritize an impact and effort matrix, which I put the link there. The idea is to identify how big the things that you actually, if you actually created a solution, you actually want to know how complex and how much impact and effort will actually those features will require. My feeling is discovery usually gets done with smaller things. Usually what we tend to do is 2 or 3 elements of features that are actually reasonably complex to actually achieve. Those are prioritized and then we actually move on. Because the sessions are actually happening every 2 weeks, you're not going to have 10 things to look at. You're going to have a smaller amount. The more you have sessions every 1 month or every 2 months, you have the problem that you're likely to have 20, 30 things to look at, too many problems to solve. And the idea is that you need to actually move reasonably fast to actually get that feedback in. The other element is, I would say, is we still be using Double Diamond, we'll still be using Focused if you're into discovery discipline as well. And also we're actually looking at more of a focusing on the broad problems, not actually focusing on we want to actually change that drop down or add another item in the drop down. Usually it's more about bigger things. We need to understand, we also run regular problem interviews, which is basically running, understanding what are the CSAT values, effectively what are the CES values. So CES is customer effort, to actually capture how the score for customer effort is required as well. So customer effort scores is a particular format where you ask questions about how difficult it was to actually do certain things. And people will be able to actually, your insights team will be able to actually identify between 1 and 5 how difficult or easy it was. Usually what you do is anything lower than 3, 1, 2, and 3, you should actually look at and implement another session to understand why you have problems. And the second element is once you actually validated some of the elements that you're going to be working on, you, as normal discovery, you probably build a prototype to actually validate together with the key users and the key customers as well.
And for the CES template, so you are running that in interviews, right? With your customers?
Correct. Well, you can. The template is basically a form that they fill in. It's actually
Okay.
two lines anyway. And then after that happens, you tend to select high scores to understand why it was so good, and the great majority of all the total lower scores. So anything under 3 should actually be looked at, because effectively it means that you have a problem. And because the customer effort score is not for the whole app, it's not for the full application or the whole product, it's for specific areas. So we tend to do onboarding when any changes in onboarding are done, any specific function which is critical, for example, closing the funnel or particular funnel elements or particular events. And the other element is if you made a massive change, having a customer effort score is very important, because it means that it gives you an idea of how well that implementation or that solution was to solve that particular problem. Usually things that involve creating reports, sharing reports, and onboarding require most of the time a CES validation, because those are actually quite difficult, and actually most people get very confused.
Right. And how it is for you guys to meet your customers? I often heard that having regular conversations with customers in B2B environment is somehow difficult because you don't want to bother them too much, or it's hard to find them. How does that work for you? Do you have any system to help you meet your customers in a good frequency?
Yeah, so we have the approach is insight sessions. So we have sessions where they're actually organized every 2 weeks. There are insight sessions with the key product, what we call champions, which are usually people who are trained a trainer, who have been trained to train somebody else. Second, who know the product very well and who use it with customers. Second, we join sessions with clients and brokers, so effectively we can listen what's happening, so effectively we can understand what's being done. Sometimes those sessions are recorded as well, not in this case of JLL, but we used to do it in Telefonica, where somebody using a product on a session will say this session will be recorded, and we were able to actually listen to everything. Some cases we can actually see what is done on the screen by using Hotjar, so we can see problems that actually happened while the users were using the product. So there's multiple, and also sometimes the sales teams will say, our client asked for this, and this is the problem we found while we're actually working with the client. So effectively, there's quite a lot of inboard feedback that we receive. And what we've done every 6 months, which is difficult, is certain what we call friendly clients are actually invited them to a session where they get asked those questions, usually forward thinking. So effectively things that we want to do in the future. And we say, look, we're thinking about doing this and doing this. And what do you think? What do you think is going to give you more value and it's going to be better for you? Or, there is specific, are we solving the right problem here? The big issue I think you may have on B2B, which I don't think I put it here, is you may find a problem to solve, but finding the problems to solve is a harder thing. You may have so many problems and so many people saying, this is the problem, this is it, and this is it. And I think it's finding the problem is the hard thing. So that's why we use all these tools and all these templates and all these customer satisfaction surveys to actually try to capture as much data as possible. And therefore make sense of that data. Sometimes we have, the idea is to say, what are the key problems that we need to address and actually prioritize. That's why I said discovery is great, But if you don't have a way to prioritize using impact effort or whatever other prioritization, whether you use RISE or PAN, whatever, you need to have a way, because you may have way too much feedback that there's noise and it's not really the signal you want to follow.
You're right, and it lends me to my next question actually. How did that work for you guys when you receive feature requests, for example, from the biggest clients you have? I think it's one of the most challenged B2B product managers face as well. Like, you have big requests coming from the biggest client. Is it the feature you have to build for everyone, or so do you have to build it for like increasing revenue, etc.? So how does discovery works having this feature request from big clients coming in the same time, you see?
Yeah. So there are two cases on that one I was going to add. Is one of the biggest clients or the biggest country, and the other one is I think it's because, I mean, we got two options. One is we always push back on customizing the product for one client. So effectively, we don't do the product for one client. Otherwise, this is not a product. This is basically an implementation for one particular client. Number one. Number two, what you need to do is understand what the problem they have, what's the problem to solve. So what's the job, or we say the job to be done. So we had issues where a particular client was looking for a particular data, and that data was required because of a legal requirement. So it was perfectly understandable that had to be there because we have to comply with the law. So effectively, this was a very easy example because we had to do it. And that didn't only apply to that particular client, that applied to multiple cases in that particular market. So we implemented that just for that market, and we had to do it for Germany, for example. And it was a case. In one case, we had to do something for one client, and we actually said, look, maybe the easiest way is to give you a standalone version of a product that basically runs with your own data, because they wanted to implement very large changes. And I say, well, we can give you a different service where it basically is a different product, which is basically more for your particular need. We didn't want to actually change the generic product, although the generic product has quite a lot of things that you can turn on and on off effectively for particular clients, which we build anyway. So it's a bit of a balancing act. I think if it's too big, I think my view would be, what's the impact on the effort? Are we looking at high value elements that could be reusable, could be our value for other customers as well? If it's not, my view is we have to spin it off. Or if in that case, we want to actually kind of implement it, we implement it almost like it's something that can be turned on and off. But also I think sometimes my experience is when we implemented something for one client in that kind of on and off, and we show it to other clients, they say, oh, we do want that as well. So I thought, okay, fine. So in a way, once you do discovery, you understand that actually it's a common need. But yeah, it's a common issue.
Right. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and then the last two things that I wanted to say is the easiest problem to solve is not usually the most urgent. So most people kind of fixate, oh, we can do this quick, we can do this quick. That's not the most important thing to do. You need to look at actually what is urgent, what needs to be done. And the division we talk about in the team all the time about urgent and important. And I always say, is it important or is it urgent? And prioritization is very critical, because otherwise you have, 20, 30, 50 items in the backlog that we can actually kind of deal with anyway. I'm going to move, just mindful of the time. This third point was metrics. So it's all connected with the previous, and in a way it was on purpose, because obviously when you do delivery or you do discovery, for example, you need to measure effectively what you've done has actually made any difference, has actually moved the needle, has actually brought more revenue. And the big difference between B2B and B2C is this, because of the sales cycle is so long, whatever you see in terms of revenue today is probably 6 to 8 months old, because effectively you close the deal with a customer back in September last year and you see the money today. So you see the money today, it's almost like looking at a star. You know, when you look at the stars and you think, oh, it's lovely stars, but what you see is old. What you see is basically the light of that star that took a number of millions of years to actually reach here. So that's old data. So the problem I think we tend to have is one is the lag, what we call lag or business lag or sales lag, which means that the revenue data is not today's data. Second is you don't have huge amount of users. You don't have millions of users like, say, Amazon. You have probably 23. I mean, we have in the 280 brokers. We had in Telefonica around 1,000 people using our product. That's nothing for B2C anyway. So you have little users. You have a lag. So revenue is an indicator which is is trusted, but it's not as clear or actual revenue effectively what's happening now. And then because of those two things, the data insights you get are not actually statistically valuable because effectively they're so small numbers that actually you can't tell. So even when you use CES, having less than 40 people, 20 to 30 people on CES is not that representative. So you need to actually send it to more people as well. 40 to 50 is the representative number anyway. So what do we use? We divide into 3 areas. We actually, I mean, whoever that did B2C must know this. So we work on 3 layers effectively. One is connected to activation, adoption, and retention. So effectively, the green area is new users. Make sure that they onboard properly. So if they don't activate within the 48 hours, we know there's a problem. So effectively, we can actually track and we can actually address that problem. Keeping those users, so effectively, what's the rate of retention, which is the opposite of churn. So effectively, if you have a retention rate of 98, you got churn of 2%. So effectively, it's both sides of the coin, effectively, whichever you want to see it. And then adoption rate, which is effectively how much active users are from signups, because it could be signups, but also they're not active. So you have a problem there. They're not activating properly. So that's the first area. So making sure that the onboarding piece and the retention is happening. Then the second area, which is the amber side, is more about engagement and usage. Okay. And the idea is that I need to know my dailies, my weekly, and the monthly active users. I need to know the daily or monthly, so I know effectively what's the engagement over the monthly basis, and also understand how much of my application gets used. And that we use a number of tools. We use Pendo, we use Google Analytics, we use we're looking at other applications, which I'm not going to say, but anyway, there's other applications we're using as well. But the idea is that feature usage, so feature usage is each feature is actually tagged. When it's a new feature, it's actually tagged. Every data point is tagged as well, so we know what gets used and what doesn't get used. And there's particular areas which are funnel-based, meaning that you need to complete a number of activities to actually get the output. So there's funnel completion and also task completion, and we capture that as well. And the idea of this is twofold. One is we understand how many people use the product, how many people is engaging with the product in a very healthy way. And the third point is how much of the product is used and how much of the product is not used. And one of the strategies that we've done and we did last year is we started removing features. We'll say, this never get used. One person used it in 6 months, forget it. We're going to can it. Because every time you build a product, it's actually bigger and bigger and bigger. And that effectively, you have a cost of building and maintaining that product. Having an approach where you start removing things is actually extremely healthy because it means that you're actually simplifying that product. You're reducing the complexity and you're actually spending more time in trying to support that as well. So there's a lot of the strategies saying, it's about usage and also non-usage as well. It needs to be tracked. So both sides of the equation need to be identified. And then the last two are about experience, whether the experience is about can I achieve what I want to do using CES, Customer Effort Score, or I'm happy to do it and I'm receiving the experience that I'm actually kind of happy with. So we take a look at the support tickets, so how many people are complaining about things. We look at the satisfaction surveys. We run satisfaction surveys on our direct clients and the clients, so effectively the brokers and the clients. We used to do that before as well. So therefore, we understand this could give us an idea of a happy client is likely to actually have a problem with churn. So effectively, we can preempt this. We can already understand that there is a problem with experience. So therefore, not waiting for them to churn out of the application. We can be more proactive. So I think that's, and also we will see that, because if they're complaining and they're not showing on they're not being used, they're not on the usage tracking, we don't see them using the application. That's actually warning lights for us to say, there's a churn issue here. So we need to address that. So those are the three areas, and that's the way we structure it, which is slightly different because obviously we have less data. So that's
one question for you, Rosendo. Could you share, for example, like what are the metrics you are focused on during this ongoing quarter with the teams, or maybe how do you define which will be the metric to focus on the metrics to focus on the 3, 4, 6 months to come?
Okay, right. So these are specific metrics, which are product metrics. So if we're looking at North Star metrics, which is probably what you're talking about, B2B tends to focus on three things, and we focus on three things. We focus on revenue, we focus on engagement, we focus on usage. Those are the three things that actually drive the great majority of the North Star. So we have to,
right,
on the OKRs, we'll have kind of, some commitments of how do we achieve the highest amount of usage, engagement, and revenue. Now, the issue will, as we talk about lag and revenue, we use pipeline values as well, so we know how much is in the pipeline. So we have an idea how much pipeline will transform into eventually a deal, and we can actually, there's additional financial calculations which are more separated from the product, which are more about what we call deal closure rates and blah blah blah. So it's more kind of, I would say that's probably more the sales, which we are connected to the sales because our product is connected to Salesforce as well. But those are the three things that are critical.
Okay.
We do also capture, this is the quantity side, effectively the quantitative thing, but there's a lot of quality behavior as well. So effectively having the conversation with the sales teams, having a conversation with the clients, understanding what are the areas and what are the elements that actually are not working very well in terms of engagement or usage. Sometimes these numbers may show that they need more training, or they need a clear understanding, or the data is not correct, so effectively it's not delivering what we want. We removed last year, we removed 3 sources of data which were confusing because people weren't understanding what the data was about. We decided that doesn't deliver what we need to actually do. And obviously on top of this, having satisfaction surveys and it gives you an idea that the customers are actually happy. But you're right, the 3 North Stars are actually on B2B are very much focused on the revenue, obviously. That's, okay. and efficiency of the revenue and the usage as well.
Well, thank you.
So the last challenge is product. And we're doing okay over time. The last challenge is product is, this is most people kind of on LinkedIn tend to kind of mention this all the time. So they says basically, if you're not embarrassed by the first question in your product, you have launched too late, meaning that effectively you can't wait for the product to be perfect. By the time the product is perfect, probably your competitors or somebody else already have a better product than yours. The problem you have here is it's slightly different because obviously you can't just basically have an unfinished product or a product is actually not delivering, because B2B customers are extremely demanding, and also you're looking at a sales process which is very extremely complicated and with a lot of commitments and legal elements as well. So the way we tend to define this is that I actually change it and says so okay, we're going to qualify. So if what we're actually shipping, what we're actually delivering, is helping us learn what we need to learn and what we want to learn, while providing value to the user. So are we actually delivering something that is providing value to the user and allowing us to learn what we need to learn? Is actually valuable for us to. So but for us to actually kind of deliver this functionality and release it. The big problem we tend to have is that products, in the case of B2B, we have a change management process which we can deliver whenever we can actually put a release whenever we want. We have legacy systems as well, which is one of the main kind of blockers as well. We have certification, data agreements. We have a number of complexity elements that actually kind of we can just basically push, every week as we would want it into a release. Despite that, releases are usually every 6 weeks, so they're not as bad as kind of some other products where they have to wait for like 4 or 5 months to actually have a proper release, and that's not the case. The idea here is you may have, and this is what happened last year. Last year we had to move our hosting from one place to another, from Southern Europe to Northern Europe, and some of the rest of the stuff into the US. And obviously we have no choice. We had to do it, and we had to pause everything that we were doing to try to move all our services and our applications and product there. Now, my view here is you had to be flexible. You had to have the ability to pivot, and be very creative in the way we ship. So what we did, we delayed that particular activity for 3 months. We actually speed up the releases for that three month period, and then we basically put a freeze, which we communicated with the rest of the clients to say, look, we're moving all this into a different environment, and we're going to have to manage this way. So I guess you have to be way more creative in the way you manage and communicate better, and explain how you're going to do things as well. So I'm reaching the end. 43, that's not that bad. So kind of 5 areas that I would like to kind of put the emphasis on. So B2B is not the same as B2C, obviously. The user and customer personas are decoupled, so the customer is not the same as the user. Discovery, you have very broad problems that you need to address, but you actually need to focus using the 5 whys and also the pain and effort matrix. You should also look at the metrics and use qualitative and quantitative metrics, focusing on the usage, focusing on the onboarding, and also on the satisfaction of the user via CSAT and SES. And obviously on product, you're going to have a lot of legacy, most of the times fairly complex, and having the ability to streamline your process and be flexible is probably one of the name of the game, actually. Otherwise, you're going to find it very hard to actually deliver for B2B. And that's me.
Cool. Thank you so much, Rosendo. It was so interesting. It's now time for a QA. So we already have a question from someone saying that it's very interesting. So thank you, Rosendo. The question is, when are you able to defocus from the North Star revenue and focus on user-centric metrics, for example, usage and engagement?
Well, to be honest, I think the business will be focusing on those, because obviously we're not only focusing on revenue, but also looking at usage. And usage will include as well what I mentioned before, which is metrics which include the ability to understand customer behavior, if they're actually using the features, if they're solving the problems, and the key area, which is usually onboarding. I'm quite fixed on, quite fixed on onboarding, because these are applications which are usually quite complex and that require training. So they're not kind of things that you can just open on a phone and you will know how to do it. It will be kind of a fair amount of training that needs to be done. And the onboarding process is absolutely critical. But those are, despite the fact that revenue is one of the North Star metrics, we have engagement, which is very much about engaging the user, which are customer based. We also have usage. And within usage, I mean, I'm very generic. So it's usage of the application, using of the features, and also taking value and also satisfaction from solving the actual kind of problems that we had to solve. So I think it's a balance. It's a difficult balance, but I agree that the emphasis on B2B seems to be very much about revenue and kind of monthly revenue calculations and very much on the financial side of how the performance of the product delivers to the company as well.
Cool. Thank you so much. I hope the question. Don't be shy, guys. We still have a few minutes, so if you have a question for Rosendo, it's the right timing, the good moment.
I was gonna one thing that actually it happened to me today when I was actually posting for LinkedIn. One question that came up on a comment was how the insight sessions for discovery are done, and I mentioned that how do you select the people and all that. So originally we actually kind of requested volunteers, but then we found that was the wrong way of putting it or structuring it. So what we did was we identify the key areas that generate the largest amount of leads and actually work with the product the highest. We have the data to understand that. We identify those users and we actually say, well, what do you think about this product? What are the key elements that you think are actually working, not working? So effectively like a retrospective. We also did, we listened to customer service calls as well. So effectively listen to people complaining, understand the frustration, understanding the pain points. And we even share that with the sales teams as well and with some of the other stakeholders to say, look, this is what's happening. And the objective of doing that was to have a session that was not only focused on their problems, also focusing on customers' problems, on the end users which are actually using the application day to day. That actually helped in a major way to align people because everybody comes with their own agenda. And it's quite difficult to differentiate between the problem space and the solution space. Everybody get into solution mode and say, no, we should do this. And say, no, wait. Let's think about the problem first. What exactly we're trying to address? What is the problem that we need to address? It's an issue of you may have multiple things that actually people tend to focus on their one side of the story. So that gave us additional ideas to put a new group together, which is basically people who contact different areas of the business in different countries as well to say, we've seen that you use the product, we've seen that you stopped using the product last week or last month. Can you tell us why? What was the problem? So effectively, we were more proactive in understanding the reasons why the product was not being used. And I think that was actually, it revealed so many additional data, and which wasn't actually on the tracking, wasn't in the, on all the metrics that we had. So sometimes the metrics are actually, you need to look for them, you need to actually go and chase them, you need to get the data from the people who are not using the application or the product, and gives you a lot of value because that's what some of the problems were. So yeah, good stuff.
Right. And I agree. I feel that working in B2B environments, when you can rely on people working on the sales part or customer success part, people who are like front line with your customers, is a great way to collect insights. And did you have to explain maybe like your needs or what it is to work in the product to the sales team, for example, to make them part of your team and help you collect insights, or having like new type of conversations sometimes with the customers as well to help you? Or how do you work with the sales team actually?
I think most people are actually really interested in supporting the product. I think there is a lot of end users are always happy to talk. I don't think that's a problem. It's usually some of the specific customers which are more group areas or local departments, which are actually kind of, you know, slightly more difficult to talk to. I think the other thing was we started traveling a bit. So obviously we are working in Spain and in the UK and in France and Germany, and our team was very specifically based in Paris, and we started moving a bit more. And we said, look, you know, we need to go and meet, show our face, and get them into an insight session, and you know, kind of understanding the problems. Sometimes certain things are very local, and that's great. But I think you capture a huge amount of elements which are valuable for the product, which may apply to actually one particular country, but actually provide value for everybody. I mean, some of the best ideas are actually customers explaining the main problem and saying, look, we can do this, and we used to use this system to copy to this another system, and to copy to this another system. We've got 4 screens, and it's just crazy. We can't copy the data between the screen. And we said to the guys and the product team, says, no more screens. No more screens. The idea was to actually, what we did was we created an API to actually capture all the data into one place. So effectively, if they wanted to do a presentation to a client, they use our product with all the data in one place, and then basically send it, even using our application to send the PDF or whatever they want to send it to the client, instead of having to actually do it all manually. And before, they had to actually copy and paste things from websites and then put it into a PowerPoint. It was crazy. It was so time consuming, and they even hiring people to actually do this work, which makes absolutely no sense. So yeah, I mean, we try to kind of, and that person now can help them and do something a bit more valuable instead of copying and pasting things. So obviously that was a big thing. I mean, it sounds small, but I think that the product is not only about delivering more revenue, it's also simplifying the life of the users and make it easier, make it more productive. So you need to think about that side as well.
Right. Very interesting. Thank you so much, Rosendo. If we do not have any more questions, I will thank you all for your attention. Thank you so much, Rosendo, for being with us tonight. I love the conversation. I just want to mention that all the material, so all the links you have in the presentation and the recording will be available in our Panash website in a few days. So don't hesitate to go on the website to find the material. And again, thank you so much, Rosendo. We talk to you soon.
Thank you, Roxanne.
Thank
And Axel
you.
as well. Bye, guys.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Bye.